Hi, Mickey.
Hi, Bob.
Who is that? Is that some kind of French general I'm supposed to recognize?
Correct.
Pétain? Who is it?
Pétain, yes. Very good.
I didn't even know who he is. The name just came to mind. Remind us who he is. Was he a...
Pétain headed the Vichy government.
Yeah, he was
the occupation government when the Nazis took over France. He formed a collaborationist government in the south of France, and he's become the synonym for sellout collaboration with the enemy. Although I'm sure there's a debate over whether what he did was net good or net bad. But
and are you about to accuse some contemporary figure in Ukraine of being that?
No. What happened is, the underlying diplomatic structure for the war seems to be that Russia has made a proposal. It had like 4 points. We get Crimea. We get the Donbas, some areas of the Donbas. No NATO. I think no EU. This was embraced by some Peter Thiel-backed Trumpist candidate somewhere, and it was attacked by Timothy Miller of the Bulwark as a Vichy MAGA solution. Well, I just think that's horribly. Is it McCarthyist? I don't know. It's horribly poisonous. The Russian plan is, and Zelensky had indicated he was amenable to negotiating on a lot of these points. You just shouldn't brand a plan that might, with some negotiation, be the basis for ending this fucking war as a Vichy MAGA plan, or a MAGA plan or a Vichy plan. So that's the point. The point is that the people of the Bulwark are sort of tarring any reasonable attempt to have a diplomatic solution, even one that Zelensky seems favorable to, as a horrible sellout. And if you look at people like Elliot Cohen, who are sort of more strident, their plans are way more ambitious and they're ridiculous. I mean,
more ambitious in what sense?
Than the plan that. Then they're more ambitious in that he wants Russia to be permanently crippled militarily and never to be able to do this again. And that's just not in the cards. If you want a big war that lasts for a long time, and with the possible threat of nuclear war, yeah, go ahead, pursue those aims. But if you don't want that, it seems to me you have to settle for something a lot less that Zelensky seems to be willing to settle for with some negotiation. Obviously, it's stalled now, but that doesn't mean that in the future they might not reach some deal.
You know, a question just occurred to me. Do you just have a portrait of General Pétain laying around?
No, that was on my iPad.
Oh, okay.
Call it up on your iPad. It's amazing, these things. You have these computers.
The modern world. I learn something every day.
And they call up images.
I learn something every day.
They're inhabited by animal spirits.
I'm against, Americans ruling out things that could bring the fighting to an end as a rule, if it might turn out that they're acceptable to Ukraine, which I don't think this would be. I mean, I don't think there is, if you do the Venn diagram with what is acceptable to Ukraine and what is acceptable to Russia, at least right now, I don't see any intersection at all.
Well, the Fred Kaplan proposed a plan, which I thought was sensible, but it was basically, it seemed very similar to the plan that was attacked as a Vichy MAGA plan, except on the EU, he stands firm and says, no, you can't stop them from joining the EU, but he would stop them from joining NATO. He has a referendum in Donbas, not just lopping it off, but he accepts the possibility that it might be lopped off. And that might be good, because if they want to join the EU, it's better not to have those regions voting in the legislature against it. Apparently, that's the most populous region of Ukraine, which I didn't realize.
Wait, which is?
The Donbas. I was shocked.
I didn't realize that either.
That's what Kaplan says.
I think that's a non-starter from Ukraine's perspective, at least right now. I don't see any way they say, sure, take the Donbas and take Crimea, even though Russia basically has them right now.
Because they're doing so well in the war?
Well, they're doing way better than expected. There's still hope that the cavalry will arrive. And
what's the cavalry?
The things they're lobbying for, a no-fly zone that morphs into actual airstrikes by NATO on Russian assets. You know, they're working hard. They're working every angle.
But we don't want those things.
Well, no, we don't. I don't. But I mean, I'm just saying they're hoping. Hope springs eternal. And look, we still haven't seen the kind of huge atrocity that can be, you know, a big psychology changer. You don't know what could change the political climate. I think they also want more ground-based, you know, the kinds of anti-aircraft that can hit high altitude targets. They mainly have the man pads that can hit low altitude, and they're effective, and they have some high altitude anti-aircraft. But if a lot of that arrived, I mean, I don't think that's a game changer because weirdly, for reasons nobody totally understands, Russia is still not using that much in the way of air power. More than they were, but not nearly all they have.
Right.
Can I? But I'll tell you, in terms of political solutions, there is one person who has the power to solve this problem. Do you know who that is?
Frank Foer.
No, we should talk about him in the Parrot Room. Let me let me write that down. This is Russiagate is this endlessly interesting thing. I'm writing Frank's name down. The correct answer is Xi Jinping. Now, as people will learn from today's issue of the Nonzero newsletter, China has for the first time used the word war to describe what's going on in Ukraine, rather than the more euphemistic language that Putin would like. They are said to be extremely unhappy with what a mess it's turned into, because remember, Xi Jinping and Putin did this Olympics bonding where, you know, Xi didn't mention Ukraine, but the joint declaration they signed did call for an end to NATO expansion.
They're basically unhappy that the war wasn't quick and victorious for Russia. They didn't anticipate that the Ukrainians would stop them to the extent they have. And so they're not upset at the war. They're upset that Russia didn't win the war.
Well, they're upset at what it's turned into and the fact that they are associated with it in the public mind, and, partly because of just the bonding they did at the Olympics, but also because, you know, China is, Russia's big lifesaver. They're the ones who seem willing to bail them out amid these sanctions. And if Xi Jinping said, look, you know, this can't go on forever. Like if he said, here's what I want. And I'll tell you what I think would be smart for Putin anyway, is to say, we've decided, you know, we surrounded Kyiv. We could take it, but the horrible, you know, Western puppet masters and the neo-Nazis and so on are deploying human shields, whatever he has to say. So we're not going to destroy this city that is part of the cradle of Russian civilization. But, you know, we have retaken the Donbas entirely. We've got this land bridge, blah, blah, blah. We've surrounded 40,000 Ukrainian troops in the Donbas. They are now prisoners of war, blah, blah, blah. I first of all think that would actually be smart from Putin's point of view. But in any event, I think if she said, look, you got to skip Kyiv, maybe you got to skip Odessa, keep this simple, or I do X, Y, and Z, because, you know, Russia is now so isolated that China's got to be, you know, wondering, China does not want to be completely isolated from the West. And if she made real threats to Putin,
no, I would think that would
have a ton of leverage.
But the
and let me just say one more thing. If we want that to happen, we're going to have to offer stuff to Xi Jinping that we're not going to like. There's a lot of stuff we do that he doesn't like, and we're going to have to rein some of that in.
Why do we have to do that? If it's sufficiently embarrassing to him, he'll just do it sua sponte.
Because we want him to ask more of Russia than his embarrassment alone would dictate that he ask.
Well, it depends how embarrassed he is.
However embarrassed he is, we want more, okay? Because, you know, we just want the least positive reinforcement for this invasion possible.
I don't think this land bridge thing was part of the outline of the Russian demands.
Probably no. I don't think it was.
Forward.
I don't think it was.
Yeah, and this is of course a sensitive time for Xi because he's up for being president for life. And
I thought that was guaranteed, isn't it?
No, people say it's not guaranteed. I think George Soros predicted he would have big trouble. Well, Soros is running around saying Putin must go. He's really done a lot of damage, that guy. What can I say?
What you mean? He's insisting that Putin go before we even make peace or something, or he's just saying he'd like Putin to go.
I think he just said.
Well, we don't like Putin to go.
And he's imposed a woke district attorney on Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Now don't change the subject, Mickey. There's a war going on.
It's hard to believe that Putin could be in a worse odor than he is now. I mean, admittedly, Ukraine, its propaganda is very effective, so they may be making more out of the atrocities than actually are, but it is very effective. So, well, how is Putin? What is Putin going to do that turns even more people against him? I mean,
oh God, there
kill
could
millions of people.
Well, I mean, certainly if he actually used chemical weapons, and I would not ever completely rule out in a situation like this the possibility of a false flag attack. That could, I mean, there have been 2 allegations of kind of fake stuff.
Wait, a false flag attack by the Ukrainians against themselves?
I wouldn't think the government would sponsor it, but some of these kind of radicals in the Azov brigade, right. You never know. They're apparently a pretty nasty, there's some pretty nasty characters. I don't know, but the, there are 2 allegations right now, one on each side about this kind of stuff. The Ukrainians are saying, as of this morning, they were saying that the Russian fighters had dropped some bombs on Belarus from Ukrainian airspace in Russian planes in order to make it look like Ukraine had attacked Belarus, to give Belarus an excuse to get into this in a significant way. Meanwhile, on the Ukrainian side, or on the Russian side, the allegation is that this maternity hospital had actually been converted into an outpost for the Azov brigade, right? And then
they wheeled out some pregnant women after the bombing attack to make it look like it was a hospital.
Oh yeah, they've got a whole story. Like one of the women in the picture apparently was, I don't know. The claims go left and right. The one interesting thing in that regard is that apparently the day before the attack, I mean, the Russians are denying they attacked it. They're not even denying they attacked it on purpose, I don't think.
Right.
The day before the attack, this spokeswoman for Russia, who I think is maybe like the press secretary, the chief spokesperson, said day before the attack, this hospital has been turned into an outpost for the Azov brigade. Anyway, my point is, they're both saying shit. In the fog of war, all kinds of stuff could happen, but stuff could happen that Russia actually does, either intentionally or unintentionally. I mean, they are becoming less discriminating. When the war started, and they really thought, apparently, that this was going to be kind of like the Crimea operation, almost that simple, they were being very careful about civilian casualties. Now, They're less and less careful. Their strategy seems to be to get civilians to clear out of the cities that they want to take. And by the way, it's another claim and counterclaim here. The Russians are claiming that actually it's the Ukrainians who are keeping the civilians from fleeing. I think as a tactical matter, the Russians do want the civilians to flee in any event. But, part of making them flee is probably making at least some of these hits on civilian targets intentional. Yeah. And so all kinds of worse shit can happen, atrocity-wise.
There was an article in the Financial Times on how Russia has a much more permissive doctrine on the use of tactical nuclear weapons than we do, and they have a lot of them. They have 1,000 to 2,000, and some of them are pretty small, but they do cross over the.
I think some are artillery fired, even.
Yeah, and it didn't make clear exactly what the doctrine was, but the point is that there's sort of a contradiction in the Elliot Cohens of the world who say, well, Putin's crazy, he has these grand ambitions, but in nuclear war, he'll be completely rational. He'll realize that it's against his interest to cross that line. Well, if he's so fucking crazy, he might not realize it's against his interest to cross the line, and we should make it. We should be very wary that he might cross the line. So,
you mean he could think that we would not retaliate with nuclear weapons if he used them, or that he could be suicidal?
That he could get away with it, or that he could be suicidal. Either one.
I've heard that speculated.
He's a he has the madman advantage. We don't trust him to be rational. He has the advantage that we thought Trump had and Nixon had, which is he's so crazy, we better stay away from him.
Right. And you don't know how much of that is opposed. I mean, I did a piece in last Monday's newsletter on my theory of his state of mind, which is, 10%, I think 10% more crazed than he was a year ago.
I like that piece. It was, I read it very quickly before this podcast, but the way you pointed out that you turned the NATO issue on its head and pointed out that it's not that he's not concerned about NATO, it's that NATO to him symbolizes all sorts of things that we would say are irrational, or we might say irrational, which is NATO symbolizes the Russian Empire, keeping out NATO symbolizes the Russian Empire that he seems so fixated on. And then he mentioned NATO 40 times in the speech that Julia Yaffe said he only mentioned once.
Yeah, Julia Yaffe and Josh Marshall. This is the famous speech where he sounded unhinged. They both said he, quote, barely mentioned NATO. That became the conventional wisdom. Everybody says that. I counted the number of mentions, 40. And he talks about it with tremendous intensity. But the argument I made is right, that it isn't just, NATO is a big national security issue, but it's also an issue of just respect for Russia. When he keeps saying, this is a red line for us, and we keep saying, screw you, we're going to cross it, that gets at his psychology in a way that's separate from national security issues. It's about his stature, Russia's stature, and I think you have to take that into account. And I think that's part of what happened and led him more and more to have this grand self-conception of this guy who's going to show you that you don't fuck with him or Russia. He is going to restore Russia's former glory.
The best argument that I've heard from the pro-NATO people is that if we hadn't, this doesn't really apply to extending NATO to Ukraine, but if we hadn't extended NATO to the Baltics, the Russians would have overrun the Baltics by now. You probably agree with that, but think that's outweighed in the larger scheme of things.
I mean, first of all, I think if we hadn't expanded NATO, we would have none of the Russian aggression we've had, not in Georgia, not in Ukraine, not in the Baltics. But if you mean if we had expanded it everywhere but the Baltics, so he was pretty pissed off, and we started talking about Ukraine.
Well, you're saying we shouldn't even have extended it to Czechoslovakia and those places.
No, all kinds of people were saying that in the 90s.
Yeah,
George Kennan, Jack Matlock, all kinds of sages in the community. Tom Friedman said it in the 90s.
Say no more.
Well, he's not exactly a radical lefty. None of these guys are. They have a realist frame of mind. John Mearsheimer said it. John Mearsheimer is catching shit. People are so pissed off that he basically did predict all this. He said in 2008, if you keep flirting with Ukraine and NATO, if you don't just turn Ukraine into an effectively neutral country, you are going to, quote, wreck Ukraine. And he said Putin isn't going to put up with it. He's going to, invade, blah, blah, blah. But he did say he's going to stay out of Kyiv. And now all the hawks, are trying to belittle him because he got that part wrong. Well, he got everything else right, okay?
There was a very unconvincing Ross Douthat column where he went way easy on Ann Applebaum, who and others who were criticizing Mearsheimer. Somehow it's supposed to be it's supposed to be a criticism of his that he overlooks the fact that passionate people like Zelensky can change history. Well, they might change history. They might not change history, but it seems to be the prudent thing to do is to, assume that NATO is still a tripwire for the Russians, and you don't say, okay, we'll trip the tripwire and count on the passion of Zelensky to change history. I mean, that just seems, that's not a critique. It's just like, if you have a wildly, accommodating ability to tolerate massive risk, yeah, you can go against the realists and hope that the idealists win the day. But that's not really a criticism of what he says.
Well, being nicer to Anne Applebaum than she deserves is kind of standard procedure among the American elites. I mean,
does Douthit live in Washington? Did you run into Anne Applebaum at parties? I mean,
I think he does still live in Washington.
Oh, I thought he lived somewhere in Connecticut or something. Okay.
Oh, maybe he did move. Maybe he did move when he was sick. I don't know.
But anyway, it's when he was sick and he only wrote 15 columns worth.
Yeah, right. It's like he writes a book about how horribly bedridden he was. Give me a break. I mean, he's 3 times as productive sick as I've ever been.
There was an Anne Applebaum column that was, I think, the text for over-optimistic, over-enthusiastic, over-excited view of these things, where in the Atlantic, now all these possibilities have opened up. You know, we can transform Russia. We can win it all. It can all be great. It just seemed it was a parallel to George Bush's "We can spread democracy everywhere, including Iraq" second inaugural address. I urge you to focus your attention and perhaps ire on it, and I think you can get a column out of it.
Did she have specific aspirations? I mean, is she talking about democratizing Russia or something?
Yes.
Oh, I think, look, there is, it's not impossible that we will see regime change. That serious people are saying that that's possible, but I would settle for just a new regime that, for now, that wants re-engagement with the West. They don't want to expand. They just let's play nice for a while, stabilize the world. If you start, if they shocked everyone and turned out to be these Democrats as well, wonderful. And look, you would certainly hope they'll open up the country a little. Wouldn't be hard given how shut down it is now.
You'll settle for way less than that. You'll settle for Putin retreating, fuming with his cover story that he's gotten back the Donbas and living to fight another day. You would settle for that at this point.
Yeah, but I'd rather there be, regime change can always lead to worse things. I think in this case, it would be unlikely to, because, assuming it's a palace coup and not some kind of actual chaotic revolution, if it's a palace coup, it's going to be people who think he's alienated the West too much.
I got shit from Fred Kaplan for writing about Fred Kaplan's proposal, but the one over-idealistic piece that I thought he had was he thought American businesses will be so reluctant to go back into Russia that it will put a lot of commercial pressure on the elites to do that sort of thing. I think American businesses are more immoral than that. I think they'll be back in Russia in an instant.
I think they'll do
as soon as it's possible.
I think they'll do whatever they can get away with. There was this piece in, I think, the Washington Post or maybe the Times about this Yale professor named Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, who played a big kind of activist role in getting a lot of these companies to pull out, putting pressure on them, public pressure. And the quote from him is, "So many CEOs wanted to be seen as doing the right thing." I mean, that's exactly right. They wanted to be seen. They don't give a shit.
Sonnenfeld's a huge player. He's more important than Franklin Foer.
Hard to imagine.
But yeah, no, he was a huge player in something before too.
By the way,
he organizes all these conspiracies.
We should learn more about him. I hadn't heard the name before. I don't mean that none of the CEOs give a shit at all. I just mean ultimately their CEO-ness tends to come first, and if they can make money, I think they pulled out because of the bottom line. Somebody convinced them that the price they'd pay would be too high. I hope they'll be back. I don't think a completely walled off Russia is a good thing.
Good point.
And well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would like to know within the Biden administration what the plan is. I mean, they're just putting more and more screws on as if it's almost like every news cycle, they have to have a new thing they're doing to Russia, right?
The plan is that
like oil imports today, and then today it was it was vodka, for God's sake. And the whole thing seems so emotionally driven at the, oh God, that reminds me, I got to play some Jake Tapper for you.
The plan is Afghanistan too. The plan is whether quickly or slowly, Russia eventually loses. Even if they take Kyiv, there'll be an insurgency that will slowly bleed them.
Okay, but
that's the plan. I think Blinken has basically announced that, hasn't he?
But honestly, if that is the plan and you wanted to minimize suffering, I think
the plan is not to minimize suffering.
Well, but I mean, here's what I'm saying. I think more and more you have to ask, could this turn into Syria, in the sense of we pour more and more arms in, the conflict goes on forever. Eventually, Russia, quote, wins, and then the insurgency begins. But the real action is when the insurgency begins and they realize that occupation is unsustainable. And in retrospect, you should have gotten there with a lot less death on both sides, right? I mean,
well, how would you get there with a lot less death on both sides?
You would not supply them with so many weapons. I mean, it sounds cold-blooded, but in Syria, the opposite happened. We supplied them with endless weapons, and it got 500,000 people killed.
They inside the insurgency is unsustainable, or the occupation is unsustainable?
I mean, the occupation is unsustainable because of the insurgency.
Right, but if we don't arm, that won't be true if we don't arm the insurgency.
Yeah, but I mean, there are kinds of arms that are designed to forestall the occupation, and there are kinds of arms that will help the occupation, like anti-tank weapons you want in an occupation. Do you want ground-based, high-altitude anti-aircraft? Not so much. I mean, because they're not going to be, they don't bomb.
So you're saying we should distinguish between the sorts of weapons we provide them?
I'm just saying I kind of worry that this could. Now, at the same time, I think it's naive to think that the Russians are on their heels. They screwed up big time. They have problems, but they are gaining ground steadily and relentlessly.
I haven't seen this pincers movement that's going to trap 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers on any maps except the ones on Russia's with attitude. It's very hard to find a trustworthy source for all this military info, but do you have any indication that it's happening?
Well, today I think they started firing on Dnipro, this city, and kind of along I think it's on the east of the Dnieper River. And I think that's in the middle part of the ring they would establish, I think, unless it's too far out to be practical. I don't know, and look, the whole thing has clearly been more complicated than they thought. They still don't have Mariupol, or however it's pronounced, quite. And, I think, look, they are learning. I mean, the reason I said early on I didn't think he'd try to occupy Kyiv is I thought he realized that it's unsustainable. I think more and more it looks like it is unsustainable. It is going to be unsustainable. It's just that he thought it wasn't going to be.
That's the one saving grace in this whole thing, in terms of worrying that after Ukraine, he's going to move on to other countries, is he doesn't seem to have enough troops to do that.
Oh yeah, no, he's got his hands full. I mean, they've got like pretty much all the troops they arrayed along the border are in, and they don't exactly have it under control. Now, they aren't using air power nearly as much as they could. And
there's a theory that he's going to have it call up reservists and draftees to fill in the spots that he's left uncovered because he's poured all the soldiers into Ukraine.
They've already found conscripts in Ukraine, and the government pulled them out and said, oh, it was a mistake.
Right, but they need the conscripts for elsewhere where he has.
They may need them for Ukraine. I mean, if they want to try to occupy even everything east of the Dnieper River, because in the north, on the Donbas, you look at the maps, and there are large swaths of land that are actually occupied by Russian troops. In the north, the maps show roads that they have traveled along.
Right,
they haven't
right.
occupied these large swaths.
Right. Unfortunately, the bogged-down convoy, 40-mile convoy, seems to have broken up and melted away.
Yeah, which may be
it was
maybe
I don't
know what it means exactly.
They were sitting ducks. I don't know why the Ukrainians didn't have a turkey shoot, but they didn't.
Well, they don't. It's not that easy. I mean, they don't control the skies. I guess neither side does. And if you're gonna approach a huge convoy with those shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons, you got to get there. See, one thing I think is that I'm starting to think is that both sides have good surveillance capability from the skies. They just don't have a lot of firepower up from the skies, right? Because if you look at, the kinds of drones that can fire missiles are really big. They're easy to spot. Right. The kinds of drones that can take pictures, give you real-time video are like 2-3 feet wide. And I think they're probably hard to find and shoot down. And probably both sides have a good idea of what's going on the ground, which means that it's not that easy for the Ukrainians to move equipment without the Russians doing something.
Right. One part of the sort of rules-based order that I don't understand, and I think it's part of your order too, is this idea of territorial integrity. I mean, it seems I don't understand why territorial integrity has to be respected if there's a coup in the government that completely changes the nature of the government. So a classic example would be Grenada, okay? Grenada was run by a charismatic Castro type named Morris Bishop. And okay, he has territorial integrity, we shouldn't invade Grenada. Then he's overthrown by an even more communist, uncharismatic type.
And we should invade.
Well, but I don't see why we have to respect territorial integrity. If he was overthrown by fascists, we wouldn't respect their territorial integrity. I mean, just because if bad guys take, if some completely alien force takes over a territory, why do suddenly we still have to respect the territory?
And what if when Donald Trump was elected, some country said he's evil, so we get to invade America? Would you have been fine with that? In other words, any given country in your scheme, any given country gets to deem the government after any kind of transition any other country unacceptable and invade it. That sounds like a really orderly world. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I'm sold.
It maybe there have to be some rules as to like peaceful transitions, et cetera, et cetera. I don't. It just seems more complicated than just territorial integrity should always be respected. There is, in international law, there has been. This isn't exactly what you're talking about, but there has been this erratic development of a doctrine that some people are enthusiastic about called responsibility to protect. And that isn't about change of government, but it does say that every government has a responsibility to protect its people. So if they start doing an unsatisfactory job of that, and certainly if they start actively, murdering large numbers of people or whatever, then you have a right to intervene. Now, that doctrine was gaining momentum until things like Libya. Like Libya was a big failure of the doctrine. That was the rationale. We got Security Council backing. And then, what do you know? An ostensibly civilian protection-oriented operation, that was the rationale. The U.S. turns into a regime change operation, creates chaos and the
bloodshed.
RTP seems way too corrosive to the international order. I always thought it was an excuse for wars that probably shouldn't be fought. So I agree with that, but I was thinking you could have some if there's a revolutionary coup that radically changes the tenor of the government in power or something. It seems to me maybe it's parasitic on the government whether the government agrees with our point of view or not. Whether it's fascist or liberal Democrat. I mean, so
if we don't agree with them, we should be allowed to invade.
If they don't respect the rules-based order, the rules-based order is allowed to go and throw them out.
That's different. The rules-based order was originally supposed to be fundamentally about a nation's behavior toward other nations. Okay? That's what the UN was fundamentally about. Preventing aggression among nations. And then there are people who say, well, we should also intervene, if their internal affairs we find unsatisfactory. And that's what the side you're apparently on now, which gives me
it just seemed weird that this fetishism of land, and borders. But
anyway. You mean the principle of sovereignty you're against?
Sovereignty linked to borders, I think, is a little arbitrary. Seems a little arbitrary.
It should have more spiritual bounds or something. Like
something like that.
You shouldn't be able to penetrate their consciousness, but you can invade their actual country.
I don't know. It just seems reified somehow, rigid. I haven't thought this through to the extent that
I thought you were in favor of keeping borders, pretty fucking rigid, say on the south of the United States.
I am, but
no, this is an interesting development in your thinking that we shouldn't be allowed to obsess about the actual physical integrity of the southern border of the United States.
Well, if the southern border were invaded by 20 million Mexicans and they occupied a strip of San Diego, and we let them do it. We let them do it. I would not fetishize our border in terms of saying, sure, cede that part back to Mexico.
But according to the Kaus doctrine,
that's why we shouldn't let them in.
According to the Kaus doctrine, which I'm starting to warm up to, if they find the transition from Obama to Trump unsatisfactory, the Mexicans can invade, and the law is on their side. I think we're on the same page here, Mickey. The Mexicans should have been allowed to invade and do regime change when Trump was elected.
Well, I think what's stopping them is not the rules-based order. What's stopping them is we could stop them. But like I said, if Aslan is 95% Mexican and they want to go back to Mexico or form their own country, I'm not going to fetishize our geographic border, which was,
what is a border?
Set in the Gadsden Purchase of whatever,
What is a border?
That's why you have to prevent that sort of thing from happening.
We should maybe take this to Parrot Room. So what do you think of Kamala Harris going to Poland? You think that'll do it?
It's hard to believe she's as awful in private as she is in these public clips you see. I don't understand at all why Biden let her do this. I mean, this is not like a campaign op. This is like war and peace and life and death and nuclear war and non-nuclear war. And to have Kamala Harris play any part in that seems fundamentally irresponsible.
So you don't think like she should be the first one to fly a MiG into Ukraine or anything? I think that would be.
No, I think that'd be a good plan. But make her walk the point.
I could see that working in a modern media environment.
But
that'd be a hell of a surprise.
Anyway, Biden, I think, has done pretty well. I mean, you may disagree with me, but it's hard to, he's done at least 80% well. And you can maybe pick some nits around the edges, but this Kamala thing is a big weakness.
Oh, you think it matters, really? I just figure it's just window dressing, whatever. Enjoy it, Kamala.
Well, maybe some of the Europeans may take it seriously.
Look, it's not as bad as Trump ceding his daughter next to Angela Merkel.
That wasn't at a time of war.
Okay.
That was at a less fraught time. But yes, that was pretty bad. But they're both women. What's the problem?
Yeah, you should always seat the women together.
Women on the march.
They can do girl talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you remember the show Girl Talk with Virginia Graham?
No.
There was a show every day on TV called Girl Talk. And Virginia Graham would gather these like housewives and talk girl talk. Those were the days, Mickey. America was great.
What decade were you talking about?
This was probably the 60s when I
Okay.
started watching TV.
Crucial formative years. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess another Ann Applebaum point, a really cheap shot you could make in this Ann Applebaum column I'm writing.
No shot is too cheap for Ann Applebaum.
I mean, her whole shtick for the last decade has been how horrible the government of Poland is. It's this fascist Viktor Orban-like state, and they've done very well in Ukraine. They've been stalwart on Ukraine, maybe a little too stalwart. Where is the praise from Ann Applebaum for the government of Poland?
Right. So now you certainly don't think there's any kind of familial connection blurring her vision.
Well, there is, but I'm trying to avoid that because that seems like too cheap a shot.
What would that be? That familial connection that you don't want to talk about?
Her husband is a Polish politician who was
excluded from the circles of power, permanently embittering his wife, perhaps.
That's you're doing that, Bob.
I would never say that. I heard that from you in the Parrot Room, I think. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I actually don't know the details there. That's why I'm avoiding it.
I don't know.
I'm just saying you can look at what she has written, and a lot of it is about how horrible the government of Poland is and how undemocratic they are. Yet they have certainly stepped up to the plate here. I guess an interesting question to me in the counterfactual realm is, what do we think Russia should have done after the fall of communism? What we did was we rubbed it in too much. We pressed them, to westernize way too much. It was all completely unnecessary, and it pissed them off. And the result is Putin. But what would be an alternative scenario where we pursued a better policy and something better would have happened?
Well, I don't think those policies are the reason Putin rose to power, strictly speaking. But I mean, it's common to blame the shock therapy, or we, I guess, impose some kind of conservative fiscal and monetary policy or something on them. And I don't know details. I mean, great economic suffering did ensue.
That's clearly part of it. That's clearly part of it.
But I also, when I was in Cuba, I came to believe that transitions like this are also intrinsically hard. It's just like when you have a state-controlled economy and then you start moving parts of it into the free market, you really got to work for corruption not to sneak in, for them not to get handed to these big shots who use them to maintain political power.
But can't you do it gradually and keep the state-controlled enterprises state-controlled, i.e. don't hand them to the oligarchs?
Yeah.
And keep things stable and let the capitalism creep in around the edges.
Maybe. I'm sure, there are better ways to do it than we've tried. But I think, I've been listening to this biography of Putin. In the early years of his presidency, he did seem to try to get along with the West. Especially, he saw 9/11 as a real opportunity to bond with the United States, apparently. And George W. Bush replied by doing the thing Putin least wanted, which was to get out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which is a stupid thing, just period, in terms of American self-interest, if you ask me. But certainly Russia really didn't want, Putin was the first person to call Bush after 9/11. He even for a while eased up on his opposition to NATO expansion as a kind of gesture.
Right.
And Bush just, as far as I can tell, gave him nothing. And Bush, of course, the big insult was 2008 when Bush said, strong-armed the Europeans into declaring that, yes, Ukraine and Georgia would join NATO. So I think there was a real opportunity.
No, it further cements the case that George W. Bush was the worst president of the century.
He was just a disaster.
Speaking of agreements falling apart, the Iran agreement looks like it may have been sabotaged by Russia. I mean, the idea that we could keep it separate from what's going on in Ukraine was probably always foolish, although it's worth a shot. But now the Russians seem to be saying, fuck you, we're not going to help you cut this deal with Iran. And the Iranians are apparently not happy with that. They actually want the deal, of course.
Yeah, I was surprised it lasted. It seemed to me our sanctions have been so draconian that it was an almost certain casualty. And for a while, people were talking as if it wouldn't be, but now it's looking like it will be. I mean, remember, Russia, they had conflicting interests. They don't want a nuclear Iran, but they don't mind Iran being sanctioned in a way that keeps oil prices high. And now more than ever, we've given them, what we've done effectively is give them an even stronger interest in keeping oil prices high. So that gives them more reason to sabotage the Iran deal, which I guess they're going to do.
But so the upshot is that Iran is going to get nukes.
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
supposedly they're on the cusp of having enriched enough uranium to produce a weapon.
Well, that's a ways from having an actual weapon. That's a couple of years away, even if you get to that level of enrichment. But I don't think there's any evidence that Iran has had an actual nuclear weapons program since like 2003 or so. When they did have one for a while, and it was.
They definitely have an enrichment program.
Well, yeah, they have a civilian nuclear energy program, as Ukraine does, right? Which, by the way, brings us to another whole Ukraine thing. The allegations about not just nuclear weapons, but bio and chemical on Russia's part.
Well, go ahead.
I guess a modestly interesting development is, you don't know to what extent Putin buys the idea that Ukraine might actually develop nuclear weapons. Is it possible that that's one reason he wanted to seize the nuclear plants, or was it just to control the power plants?
Well, he mentioned that in his crazy speech. He mentioned them getting nuclear weapons.
And he mentioned, and they've long been saying, and Americans are helping them develop bioweapons. And it's funny, did you see this Victoria Nuland testimony in Congress?
I read the Glenn Greenwald column about her testimony. Apparently, she came close to admitting that they did.
Well, Marco Rubio.
Why didn't she just lie?
Marco Rubio says, I forget the question, something like, are there any biological weapons laboratories in Ukraine or something like that? But I think he was expecting her to just say no. And she started choosing her words very carefully, saying, well, there are biological laboratories, and we're concerned that they will fall into the hands of the Russians. Wait a second. What would be in them that would make you concerned?
Right. Maybe a coronavirus.
And I think maybe we have been, I don't know. I think there may be more. I don't think we have bioweapons labs per se in Ukraine, but I think there may be more than we know about.
I saw that. Why is Victoria Nuland in power?
This is
hasn't she done enough damage?
This is a good example of us just giving no thought whatsoever at things we might do that are going to drive the Russians crazy. Okay, remember, in 2014, she is the very face of American interference in Ukrainian politics.
Right.
She's the one who had the phone call where she was sitting there, orchestrating, deciding who they were going to christen as the new leader after the existing leader, was deposed.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and then Biden decides to give her a job in the State Department that will mean she keeps sitting across the table from Russians. It's like,
well, why would
Blinken
go along with that? It seems insane.
I don't have a sufficiently high opinion of Blinken to find that puzzling. I think he's a reasonably smart guy. I just don't think he's I don't think he's world class. He's a guy who was a Senate staffer. The guy he worked for got elected president. And now he's Secretary of State. He's not Zbig Brzezinski or Henry Kissinger.
Who was the guy who the Les Gelb? It was Les Gelb. Who was the foreign policy maven who was very old and passed away recently? He had a whole magazine.
He was one. He was, he had been a New York Times columnist. Then I think for a while, he was head of the Council on Foreign Relations.
He basically said, all of our foreign policy people are crap except for Tony Blinken. He has talent. So I was impressed by that.
I don't think. Look, Blinken doesn't seem stupid, and apparently he did do a good job of stitching, holding the Europeans together on providing sticks, to apply in the event of a Russian invasion. But again, I don't think they gave much attention to carrots and giving Putin an off ramp and so on. Now, maybe Putin wouldn't have taken it. I think there's a little more reason to believe that than there was before, but they didn't even try, as far as I can tell.
I thought they were obsessed with preserving an on-ramp for Putin, off-ramp for Putin.
They just didn't take his actual demand seriously. Yeah. I mean, they just, he said, I need, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And they said, well, how about X and Y? No, it's like you got to give him one fucking bullet point. I mean,
what do you, and Elliot Cohen is a useful polar. I mean, somebody to what's the word? Straw man. He's a useful opponent here because he said we have to be careful not to give Putin too many off ramps too early. You have to grind his nose in his defeat for a while, which it seems insane. I don't know.
He's Elliot Cohen's a neocon, basically. I mean, this is part of the ideology of neocons. It's not usually stated explicitly, but it's like all sticks will work with everyone.
And it's also as if Putin doesn't have nuclear weapons. You can never worry that if you punish him enough, he'll say, well, fuck it, I'm going to start using nuclear weapons. That's all I have. I mean, it's almost as if Putin's going to start nuclear weapons because he's used up all his other weapons. Like he has no more conventional munitions left. I mean, so he's got to use the expensive stuff, right?
This is what I wonder about when I say, are we really giving thought to this? The extent to which we may be putting him in a corner. I don't mean where he's going to fire a nuke, but where he takes a risk that turns it into a wider war that could turn into a nuclear war. I just wonder if we're thinking enough about, for him, this is existential. It could go badly enough for him to, lose power. That's existential for him. And you just have to keep that in mind. The combination of sanctions and the resistance he's getting in the war are putting him, I think, in a pretty bad place. And that's why I'm not sure about the sanctions. I mean, we'll see.
And finally, the one point where Fred Kaplan was strident or at least adamant and firm was that they should be allowed to join. Ukraine should be allowed to join the EU, which if Putin weren't around, obviously that's a good thing. But why can't we put some restrictions on them joining the EU? Like, say, you can never be a member of the EU, but of course you can engage in bilateral trade talks with every member of the EU. I mean, there is this argument that the main reason they want to join the EU is because then everybody will leave Ukraine and move to the European Union because they would have the right to move around. And why did we have to agree to that? I mean, I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in 2013, Putin when Ukraine was seeking this kind of a kind of affiliation with the EU. Putin was trying to work out some kind of special deal where Ukraine would have a strong connection to the EU, but maintain a strong connection to Russia. But nobody was up for talking to him about any kind of creative solution.
That was one of the two secret things the 2 points where we fucked up negotiations by giving Putin the back of our hand that nobody talks about. I hadn't realized that he had made that intermediate offer. The other thing that you pointed out in your column is that somehow right before he invaded, we signed some document that preserved Ukraine's right to join NATO.
I didn't know that until recently. But yeah, this guy, is it Robert Service? His last name's Service. He's a noted expert on Russia, and he's actually at the Hoover Institute, which is a conservative thing at Stanford. But in a Wall Street Journal interview, he said that the straw that broke the back with Putin was this November document that I didn't even know about, but apparently Biden and Zelensky, the U.S. and Ukraine jointly issued a thing affirming Ukraine's right to seek membership in NATO, and it had some title about solidarity between the two, and it's just a good example of like why did we do that? I mean,
why did Zelensky do that? It seems a huge miscalculation on his part. Go ahead.
I don't know. In a way, why either of them did it. It seems more mysterious to me why Biden did it, unless it's like, there must be some kind of domestic political, I don't know. But it's.
I don't believe the Ukrainians are a powerful domestic political force.
But it isn't just
the way the Cubans are, for example.
I mean, there's also arms makers who like this. There's Ukrainian, but look, you do keep hearing about Ukrainian diaspora voters. Chris Murphy cites them. You do keep hearing about that, but
maybe Zelensky had the goods on Biden because his son, in fact, was corrupt, and if Trump had gotten him to investigate, he would have come up with something on Biden, so he has it by the balls.
That's a great Parrot Room theory, but I'm not sure that's worthy of even the Parrot Room.
It's no crazier than the theory of, Trump having models urinate on Obama's bed in Moscow.
That's true, but that turned out, as you know, to be quite false.
I actually think I don't know that it's false. Very hard to prove a negative.
Yeah, could be.
So I didn't watch this. There was a 60 Minutes with the guy who put it into the dossier. I didn't see that. Anyway, Hunter Biden obviously is corrupt, and who knows what the hell he was doing in Ukraine, right? So if you're looking for leverage on the president of the United States, that's a possible bit of leverage. He's obviously very, very sensitive about Hunter.
Let's float that theory. Let's put it up as a trial balloon in the Parrot Room.
I just thought of it.
And if it flies, we'll take it public. Speaking of which, we are approaching an hour, Mickey.
Great. I had sort of one sort of substantive thing I wanted to bring up, but I can bring it up in the Parrot Room, or I can bring it up now. You can deal with it very quickly.
Why don't you tease it now?
Well, there was this column by Janan Ganesh, who writes a column for the Financial Times, he's invariably described as the finest columnist in the English language. You never say he's the best columnist. That could be somebody else. The finest columnist, because he writes about literature, and he can write about anything. He can write about music. He has incredible range. And he's good. He's a good columnist. But he had a thing saying the Ukraine events are a sort of death blow to populism, because populists always are for autocracy, and this hits them where it hurts, because it proves that autocrats like Putin are not even competent. So it sort of pulls the rug out from under Trumpists, because it shows that Trumpists won't make the trains run on time or make anything happen. And I don't understand where did this connection come from, and it seems not logical, and not even probably historical fact that populists are always for autocrats. I mean, America's had a rich populist tradition for centuries, and it hasn't been pro-autocrat. It's been pro silver. It hasn't been pro loose money. But it hasn't been pro-autocracy. It's usually been couched as, we want more democracy. We want Jacksonian populism. We want to broaden the impact of democracy. So I don't know. It seems to me he's extrapolating from a couple of data points: Trump, Orban, and Poland. Okay, and because Putin funded all those populist anti-immigration, ethnocentric movements, somehow they've tended to be pro-Putin too. But the logical connection escapes me.
Well, maybe I'll think up a response between now and the Parrot Room, but it's not obvious to me why he thinks that's an automatic connection either.
I think, anyway, I think even Richard Spencer, the horrible sort of
neo-Nazi is the word you're looking for.
Racist adjacent guy. I think he's now flipped because his wife divorced him. So he's.
What is he now? He's a good.
I don't know. He's something else now. But perhaps he's been weaned away from autocracy, and if it can happen that easily, I suggest that the connection is not like inherent and unbreakable. So,
well, divorce is a good rebranding opportunity, and apparently he's taking advantage of it. So, what else are we going to talk about in the Parrot Room at patreon.com/Parrot Room?
You wanted me to limit myself to 5.
Yeah, I think ideally we would wind up actually talking about most of the things we promised to talk about.
Yeah, which we always forget. One is on my 5. I have Oren Cass has written an interesting article where he claims that Adam Smith. He sort of revises Adam Smith in a way that I can't believe nobody else has thought of before.
Okay.
There's a sex scandal at the border. The opponent of Henry Cuellar in the runoff, Ms. Cisneros, a former staffer, has been caught in a sex scandal that unfortunately...
Wait, Mrs. Cisneros? Wait, Henry Cisneros or Henry...
No, I don't think it's related to Henry Cisneros. Okay. It's a violation of the Herrnstein rule that, yes, they always are related, because Cisneros is a pretty common name. But I have a grudge against Henry. No.
Yeah.
What's your grudge?
He came to my our high school senior award ceremony, gave his little talk, but before Bob gets his award for being the highest ranked male student, yes, they did it that way in those days. There was a highest ranked male and a highest ranked female. Henry sneaks out the back, so he wasn't there to witness me going up. This
wasn't like a scholar athlete award. You weren't like the highest ranked athlete scholar.
Well, I was the highest ranked athlete. I was the highest ranked male, and technically I was an athlete, even though I wasn't much of one. So come to think of it, yes, I was a scholar athlete.
Okay. But you didn't give a speech. It's not like he missed your speech.
No, he missed me taking this little trophy in my hand and thinking, wow, now there's a guy I should, hire if I ever become a powerful politician. He didn't say that because he didn't see it.
Okay. Well, fuck him. But anyway,
Exactly.
I think this woman, anyway, the point is her texts have come to light. And I will read her texts, but sadly, they do not reach the heights of depravity or even any heights of depravity. They're the most wholesome sex text you'll ever possibly.
We can work with that. We can work with that.
And I just don't think this sex. I'm gonna.
Don't give it away. Don't leave it in the locker room. What's next on your list?
There's why is Akhil Amar such a what's the word? A sneering, overconfident legal scholar, and when he writes about the issue that is actually at the heart of the current debate over democracy, which is does the Constitution give all power to the state legislatures? But even in his sneering, overconfident way,
that's enough, Mickey. We're just teasing.
I think he may be right. I'm going to explain
coincidentally,
why he may be right.
Coincidentally, something I wanted to talk about in the Parrot Room is who the fuck is Akhil Amar? So we'll settle both of those questions. What's next on your list?
Was Bob Saget murdered?
There is new, I think the answer is no, but yeah, he's the comedian, former host of America's Funniest Home Videos.
I'd always assume the answer was no too, and then I ran into somebody from Hollywood.
Oh, that reminds me.
They seemed shocked by this new evidence.
That reminds me, while in a doctor's waiting room, I struck up a conversation who has a theory about Natalie Wood's death that you're probably quite familiar with, but I want to see if it's the standard theory or not. Go ahead.
I'm not familiar with it at all. All I know is that Christopher Walken is at the heart of it.
That was certainly part of her theory. I'll save the rest for the Parrot Room.
And the other thing is I was right about the convoy, but that it's going to flop. But I've now said it, so
that's not happening.
I was right about the convoy. It's flopping, the American convoy.
Okay.
But it's flopping because of Ukraine, not because the COVID restrictions are no longer an issue.
And as for my part in the Parrot Room, I want to play something Jake Tapper said that in a just world, I think would be the end of his career as a journalist.
Okay.
I want to go a little further into these, charges, counter charges on these two on the hospital bombing in Mariupol and the logic behind the claims and counterclaims. It's not actually a false flag claim, but it's a conspiracy claim. I guess I could quickly complain. No, I'll just about Michael McFaul briefly. I want to say more. I've gone a little further in this Putin biography. Looks like we'll be talking about Natalie Wood, and that's probably about enough. This reader asked a question about my theory of the O.J. Simpson murder. The murder of his wife. It's enough. It's enough.
I loved your theory.
It's a good theory.
Anyway, it seems
maybe we'll get into, Facebook is the Facebook and Twitter, the way they're tailoring, the way their various manifestations of anti-Russianism on, I just mean, taking what they would call it, I don't know, pro-Ukrainian or something.
Saying it's okay. People, the pro-Ukrainian sentiment has reached a sort of hysterical point. Even though I'm obviously on Ukraine's side, it's I
think it's
out of control.
I mean, the Jake Tapper thing I think will make that point. I hope.
And it's also the question, as long as we're on big tech, there's the issue of does Google search really suck as bad as everybody thinks it does?
I think there's a sense in which it sucks. So I look forward to talking about that. All right.
Anyway, there you go.
So on to the Parrot Room.
Pretty damn exciting.
Patreon.com/Parrot Room.
Not enough sex, though. Not enough sex, though.
We'll take care of that in the
More
in
sex.
The Parrot Room. There will be, trust us. We'll see you there.